Hi, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading, and this is a Maryland-marked U.S. Springfield model 1795 Flintlock musket. The model 1795 is historically significant as the first official standardized U.S. martial arm and the first firearm manufactured at the U.S. armories. The model 1795 was based on the French model 1766, widely used during the American Revolutionary War, and was the main infantry arm of the War of 1812. This musket has the correct Type 1 markings and features, and the lack of a date suggests it was produced between 1795 and 1799. Prior to the adoption of date markings. It has the first style of lock marking with the Springfield in a vertical curvature behind the hammer, and at the center of the lock is the shielded eagle looking to its right above a script US. Note the distinctive curls on the frizzen toe and on the top jaw used on the Type 1 muskets. The P Eagle V proof marks on the left of the breech ahead of the deep condemnation marks, and a faint US marked on the top of the breech. Maryland is marked in large letters ahead of the lock. Military arms like this one aren't necessarily my specialty, but I wanted to highlight this wonderful piece of American muzzleloading history. As much as this is America's first official military arm produced at the United States armories, you can still see the French influence throughout this piece. From our buttstock to our comb, our lock plate and barrel design, especially here at the breech, to the three band designs going forward here on the stock. The French influence certainly abounds here, and what I love about this is this French influence can be seen in military arms throughout really the first 100 years of American military arms. Starting at our butt plate here, moving forward, our butt plate is held on by two massive screws. One here at the top on the crest of our buttstock, and the other here about 2/3 of the way down our butt plate. The toe on this 1795 Springfield musket is rounded like we see on many military arms for the period. We have a rather large, rather thick stock, not necessarily as bulky though as we see in some later military arms, especially those leading through the American Civil War almost 100 years later. Much like the French model 1766, our comb here ends at a very fine point. Directly below the comb on the stock, we have the first screw for our trigger guard. We have a large iron trigger guard here that is held on with a screw at the rear and a screw at the front of the trigger guard. We have a single large trigger here inside of our trigger guard, and then we have a single sling swivel just forward of the bow on our trigger guard. If the characteristics of the stock did not give this away as having French influence, the lock absolutely should. Like many military flintlocks for the era, our lock is large, it's heavy, and it's durable, designed that way to be a powerhouse in the field. When we think about flintlocks as a military arm compared to modern centerfire military arms, these can seem clunky and slow, but for the period, although they were military contract arms, these flintlocks went through production ordinances to mandate their quality and efficiency in the field. Some documentation has required these locks on a single flint to fire successfully as many as 40 shots at a time. Talking about the lock here a little bit more, we have a large flat lock plate with some beveled edge around the rear and bottom towards the front of our lock plate here. Our frizzen spring here at the front is very wide, very thick spring here, supporting a rather large and heavy frizzen at the front. How satisfying is that click? These locks are heavy. They are workhorses for these rifles. The entire rifle, or musket itself, I should say, is elegant, despite it being a military arm. In these early arms, we still have some of that light elegance before we get into some of the larger, more brutal, it could be described, military arms of the early 19th century. I want to make note of our top draw screw here. We have the very common for the period hole through the lock screw running perpendicular to the screw itself. The top of the screw, though, also features a screwdriver or a turn screw slot. So this could be adjusted in the field in line with our threads or perpendicular to our threads, depending on what kind of tool the user of this musket might have at the time. A small detail I want to note too on this jaw is it's hard to know when this modification was done, but we do have some teeth cut into the bottom and top jaws of our cock or hammer here to better hold our leather and our flint. We see this done in many contemporary muzzleloaders as well, but it is a neat detail to see on an old piece like this. Can't say for certain, or at least I can't say for certain at this time, if this came this way or if this was done later. Moving through the piece, we have a single tang bolt through the tang of our barrel, and we have our selected proof marks here at the breech of the rifle. We have a US stamp on top, and then on our side plate side, we have our P, Eagle, V marks as well. This is a fully round musket barrel. We have no octagonals and we have no transitions around it. Forward of our lock, we have our Maryland carving here. Forward of our Maryland carving, we have our first barrel band with its spring release. This band itself acts as the entry pipe that we see in some other muzzle loaders, protecting the transition where our ramrod goes fully into our stock. Forward of our rear barrel band, we have our center barrel band that doubles as our frontward sling swivel here. Forward of our center band here, we have our muzzle barrel band, which has our integrated front sight in the rear band of our front or muzzle band here. Our front barrel band also acts as a bit of a nose cap, protecting the end grain of our stock. Forward of our muzzle barrel band, we do have our bayonet lug on the top center of our barrel, just about an inch or 3/4 of an inch away from our muzzle. Our ramrod is a fully iron ramrod, or rammer, as we see them described as in period documentation. We do have a bit of a trumpet bell on the end. This allows us to more accurately center our ramrod in the loading process and fully seat what would have been a paper cartridge for the time. Something I really enjoy in period documentation and journals about these iron ramrods is the iron ramrod became one of the primary cooking utensils for U.S. soldiers in the field in a situation where they were away from camp or away from supply chains. There are period journals and documentation showing that meat was hung over their rammers, over the fire, to cook or smoke it in the field. On our side plate side here, we don't have a whole lot of difference compared to our lock side. You'll notice that we don't have the spring releases visible for our barrel bands on this side. When we get back to our side plate side here, however, you do see our large lock bolts that go through to hold our lock to the stock and the barrel assembly. Then we have a simple iron side plate that is left unadorned on this piece in particular. Looking at the top here at our mortise around the barrel, we do see some dents and scratches here along our side plate mortise, which I really like to see in many of these original arms. I love seeing those signs of use throughout the piece. Our side plate mortise on this side is even at the front and the rear with our lock mortise on the other side. So there is a degree of symmetry on this piece. Speaking of symmetry, as we move back through our unadorned wrist, you'll see that our buttstock on this side matches almost perfectly with the buttstock on our lock plate side. There is no noticeable cheek rest or other decoration, which is very common for military arms of the period. I'd like to make a note as well here. Looking at our front barrel band from the top, you can notice a slight swell in the shaping of the stock to accommodate this band. We see this a little bit here in our middle band, but it is very noticeable looking at our rear band from the top here. As noted previously, here on our side plate side, you can see the pin that is used to hold in the front of our trigger guard here. This pin terminates inside the lock mortise, so the pin itself is not affected by the lock. Again, while American military arms aren't my specialty, it is always fascinating to see an original piece like this one and see the influences carried over through time. I still contend that you could hold this piece up to a French model 1766. You can compare it to a Springfield from the American Civil War, and you can compare that to an M1 Garand, and you could see similar influences carried out. I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to sit down and go through this Maryland-marked U.S. Springfield model 1795 flintlock musket. I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation here today. If you'd like to learn more or see high-quality photos and videos of this arm or other arms, I encourage you to visit the Rock Island Auction Company social media pages to learn more. Once again, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.